Most documents disappear into filing cabinets. A few become legislation. A small number become operating systems. This is one of those. In the summer of 1971, Lewis F. Powell Jr., a prominent corporate attorney, composed a confidential memorandum for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce entitled Attack on the American Free Enterprise System. It wasn't intended for public circulation. It was written for an audience that already possessed considerable economic influence, but, in Powell's estimation, had become politically and culturally passive. Powell's argument was less about markets than institutions. He contended that American businesses had ceded influence over universities, the media, the courts, and public discourse while focusing primarily on commerce. His concern was that ideas shaping future law, policy, and public opinion were increasingly being developed elsewhere. His recommendations reflected that diagnosis. Rather than responding to individual legislative battles, Powell proposed sustained investment in legal advocacy, academic scholarship, public communication, educational programs, litigation, and long-term institutional development. The memo describes a strategy measured not in election cycles, but in generations. Culture, after all, is difficult to lobby once it has become common sense. 2 months after completing the memo, then-President Richard Nixon nominated Powell to the Supreme Court of the United States. He was confirmed later that year and served until 1987. During his tenure, Powell frequently occupied the ideological center of the court. Among his most influential opinions was First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti, which expanded First Amendment protections for corporate political speech and established legal principles that would echo through later campaign finance decisions. History occasionally rewards strategic planning with exceptionally convenient career moves. The relationship between the memorandum and subsequent political developments remains a subject of debate. The memo carried no legal authority, and the institutional changes that followed can't be attributed to a single document. Nevertheless, many of the strategies Powell described, including expanded investment in think tanks, policy organizations, strategic litigation, academic programs, and coordinated public advocacy, became increasingly prominent in the decades that followed. One might say the memo received an unusually successful implementation phase. For that reason, the Powell Memo occupies an unusual place in American political history. It's not read as legislation or jurisdictional opinion, but as a strategic document, an articulation of how one influential participant believed economic power could be translated into enduring institutional influence. It also serves as a useful reminder that the architecture of power is often drafted long before anyone notices. What follows is the memorandum itself, presented in full. Confidential Memorandum. Attack on American Free Enterprise System. Date, August 23, 1971. To Mr. Eugene B. Sydnor Jr., Chairman, Education Committee, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. From Lewis F. Powell Jr. This memorandum is submitted at your request as a basis for the discussion on August 24 with Mr. Booth and others at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The purpose is to identify the problem and suggest possible avenues of action for further consideration. Dimensions of the attack. No thoughtful person can question that the American economic system is under broad attack. Variously called the free enterprise system, capitalism, and the profit system, the American political system of democracy under the rule of law is also under attack, often by the same individuals and organizations who seek to undermine the enterprise system. This varies in scope, intensity, in the techniques employed, and in the level of visibility. There always have been some who opposed the American system and preferred socialism or some form of statism, communism or fascism. Also, there have always been critics of the system, whose criticism has been wholesome and constructive so long as the objective was to improve rather than subvert or destroy. But what now concerns us is quite new in the history of America. We're not dealing with episodic or isolated attacks from a relatively few extremists, or even from the minority socialist cadre. Rather, the assault on the enterprise system is broadly based and consistently pursued. It is gaining momentum and converts. Sources of the attack. The sources are varied and diffused. They include, not unexpectedly, the communists, new leftists, and other revolutionaries who would destroy the entire system, both political and economic. These extremists of the left are far more numerous, better financed, and increasingly are more welcomed and encouraged by other elements of society than ever before in our history, but they remain a small minority and are not yet the principal cause for concern. The most disquieting voices joining the chorus of criticism come from perfectly respectable elements of society, from the college campus, the pulpit, the media, the intellectual and literary journals, the arts and sciences, and from politicians. In most of these groups, the movement against the system is participated in only by minorities, yet these are often the most articulate, the most vocal, and the most prolific in their writing and speaking. Moreover, much of the media, for varying motives and in varying degrees, either voluntarily accords unique publicity to these attackers or at least allow them to exploit the media for their purposes. This is especially true of television, which now plays a predominant role in shaping the thinking, attitudes, and emotions of our people. One of the bewildering paradoxes of our time is the extent to which the enterprise system tolerates, if not participates in, its own destruction. The campuses from which much of the criticism emanates are supported by 1. Tax funds generated largely from American business, and 2. Contributions from capital funds controlled or generated by American business. The boards of trustees of our universities overwhelmingly are composed of men and women who are leaders in the system. Most of the media, including the national TV systems, are owned and theoretically controlled by corporations which depend upon profits and the enterprise system to survive. Tone of the attack. This memorandum is not the place to document in detail the tone, character, or intensity of the attack. The following quotations will suffice to give one general idea. William Kunstler, warmly welcome on campuses and listed in a recent student poll as the American lawyer most admired, incites audiences as follows. You must learn to fight in the streets, to revolt, to shoot guns. We will learn to do all of the things that property owners fear. The new leftists who heed Kunstler's advice increasingly are beginning to act, not just against military recruiting offices and manufacturers of munitions, but against a variety of businesses. Since February 1970, branches of Bank of America have been attacked 39 times, 22 times with explosive devices, and 17 times with firebombs or by arsonists. Although new leftist spokesmen are succeeding in radicalizing thousands of the young, the greater cause for concern is the hostility of respectable liberals and social reformers. It is the sum total of their views and influence which could indeed fatally weaken or destroy the system. A chilling description of what's being taught on many of our campuses was written by Stuart Alsop. Yale, like every major college, is graduating scores of bright young men who are practitioners of the politics of despair. These young men despise the American political and economic system. Their minds seem to be wholly closed. They live not by rational discussion, but by mindless slogans. A recent poll of students on 12 representative campuses reported that almost half of the students favored socialization of basic U.S. industries. A visiting professor from England at Rockford College gave a series of lectures entitled The Ideological War Against Western Society, in which he documents the extent to which members of the intellectual community are waging ideological warfare against the enterprise system and the values of Western society. In a foreword to those lectures, famed Dr. Milton Friedman of Chicago warned, "It is crystal clear that the foundations of our free society are under wide-ranging and powerful attack, not by communist or other conspiracy, but by misguided individuals parroting one another and unwittingly serving ends they would never intentionally promote. Perhaps the single most effective antagonist of American business is Ralph Nader, who, thanks largely to the media, has become a legend in his own time and an idol of millions of Americans." A recent article in Fortune speaks of Nader as follows. "The passion that rules in him, and he is a passionate man, is aimed at smashing utterly the target of his hatred, which is corporate power. He thinks and says quite bluntly that a great many corporate executives belong in prison for defrauding the consumer with shoddy merchandise, poisoning the food supply with chemical additives, and willfully manufacturing unsafe products that will maim or kill the buyer. He emphasizes that he is not talking just about fly-by-night hucksters, but the top management of blue-chip business. A frontal assault was made on our government, our system of justice, and the free enterprise system by Yale professor Charles Reich in his widely publicized book, The Greening of America, published last winter. The foregoing references illustrate the broad shotgun attack on the system itself. There are countless examples of rifle shots which undermine confidence and confuse the public. Favorite current targets are proposals for tax incentives through changes in depreciation rates and investment credits. These are usually described in the media as tax breaks, loopholes, or tax benefits for the benefit of business. It is dismaying that many politicians make the same argument that tax measures of this kind only benefit business without benefit to the poor. The fact that this is either political demagoguery or economic illiteracy is of slight comfort. The setting of the rich against the poor, of business against the people, is the cheapest and most dangerous kind of politics. The apathy and default of business. What has been the response of business to this massive assault upon its fundamental economics, upon its philosophy, upon its right to continue to manage its own affairs, and indeed upon its integrity? The painfully sad truth is that business, including the boards of directors and the top executives of corporations great and small and business organizations at all levels, often have responded, if at all, by appeasement, ineptitude, and ignoring the problem. There are, of course, many exceptions to this sweeping generalization, but the net effect of such response as has been made is scarcely visible. In all fairness, it must be recognized that businessmen have not been trained or equipped to conduct guerrilla warfare with those who propagandize against the system, seeking insidiously and constantly to sabotage it. The traditional role of business executives has been to manage, to produce, to sell, to create jobs, to make profits, to improve the standard of living, to be community leaders, to serve on charitable and educational boards, and generally to be good citizens. They have performed these tasks very well indeed, but they have shown little stomach for hard-nosed contest with their critics, and little skill in effective intellectual and philosophical debate. A column recently carried by the Wall Street Journal was entitled, "Memo to GM, Why Not Fight Back?" Although addressed to GM by name, the article was a warning to all American business. Columnist St. John said, "General Motors, like American business in general, is plainly in trouble because intellectual bromides have been substituted for a sound intellectual exposition of its point of view." Mr. St. John then commented on the tendency of business leaders to compromise with and appease critics. He cited the concessions which Nader wins from management and spoke of the fallacious view many businessmen take toward their critics. He drew a parallel to the mistaken tactics of many college administrators. College administrators learn too late that such appeasement serves to destroy free speech, academic freedom, and genuine scholarship. One campus radical was conceded by university heads only to be followed by a fresh crop which soon escalated to what amounted to a demand for outright surrender. One not need agree entirely with Mr. St. John's analysis, but most observers of the American scene will agree that the essence of his message is sound. American business plainly is in trouble. The response to the wide range of critics has been ineffective and has included appeasement. The time has come, indeed, it is long overdue, for the wisdom, ingenuity, and resources of American business to be marshaled against those who would destroy it. Responsibility of business executives. What specifically should be done? The first essential, a prerequisite to any effective action, is for businessmen to confront this problem as a primary responsibility of corporate management. The overriding first need is for businessmen to recognize that the ultimate issue may be survival of what we call the free enterprise system, and all that this means for the strength and prosperity of America and the freedom of our people. The day is long past when the chief executive officer of a major corporation discharges his responsibility by maintaining a satisfactory growth of profits with due regard to the corporation's public and social responsibilities. If our system is to survive, top management must be equally concerned with protecting and preserving the system itself. This involves far more than an increased emphasis on public relations or governmental affairs, two areas in which corporations long have invested substantial sums. A significant first step by individual corporations could well be the designation of an executive vice president ranking with other executive VPs whose responsibility is to counter, on the broadest front, the attack on the enterprise system. The public relations department could be one of the foundations assigned to this executive, but his responsibilities should encompass some of the types of activities referred to subsequently in this memorandum. His budget and staff should be adequate to the task. Possible role of the Chamber of Commerce. But independent and uncoordinated activity by individual corporations, as important as this is, will not be sufficient. Strength lies in organization. and careful long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, in the scale of financing available only through joint effort, and in the political power available only through united action and national organizations. Moreover, there is the quite understandable reluctance on the part of any one corporation to get too far out in front and make itself too visible a target. The role of the National Chamber of Commerce is therefore vital. Other national organizations, especially those of various industrial and commercial groups, should join in the effort, but no other organizations appear to be as well situated as the Chamber. It enjoys a strategic position, with a fine reputation and a broad base of support. Also, and this is of immeasurable merit, there are hundreds of local chambers of commerce which can play a vital supportive role. It hardly need be said that before embarking on any program, the Chamber should study and analyze possible courses of action and activities, weighing risks against probable effectiveness and feasibility of each. Considerations of cost, the assurance of financial and other support from members, adequacy of staffing, and similar problems will all require the most thoughtful consideration. The campus. The assault on the enterprise system was not mounted in a few months. It has gradually evolved over the past 2 decades, barely perceptible in its origins and benefiting from a gradualism that provoked little awareness, much less any real reaction. Although origins, sources, and causes are complex and interrelated and obviously difficult to identify without careful qualification, there is a reason to believe that the campus is the single most dynamic source. The social science facilities usually include members who are unsympathetic to the enterprise system. They may range from Herbert Marcuse, Marxist faculty member at the University of California, San Diego, and convinced socialist, to the ambivalent liberal critic who finds more to condemn than to commend. Such faculty members need not be in a majority. They are often personally attractive and magnetic. They are stimulating teachers, and their controversy attracts student following. They are prolific writers and lecturers. They author many of the textbooks, and they exert enormous influence, far out of proportion to their numbers, on their colleagues and in the academic world. Social science faculties, the political scientists, economists, sociologists, and many of the historians, tend to be liberally oriented even when leftists are not present. This is not a criticism per se, as the need for liberal thought is essential to a balanced viewpoint. The difficulty is that balance is conspicuous by its absence on many campuses, with relatively few members being of conservative or moderate persuasion, and even the relatively few often being less articulate and aggressive than their crusading colleagues. This situation, extending back many years and with the imbalance gradually worsening, has had an enormous impact on millions of young American students. In an article in Barron's Weekly seeking to answer to why so many young people are disaffected even to the point of being revolutionaries, it was said, "Because they were taught that way." Or, as noted by columnist Stuart Alsop writing about his alma mater, Yale, like every major college, is graduating scores of bright young men who despise the American political and economic system. As these bright young men from campuses across the country seek opportunities to change a system which they have been taught to distrust, if not indeed despise, they seek employment in the centers of the real power and influence in our country, namely, 1. with the news media, especially television, 2. in government as staffers and consultants at various levels, 3. in elective politics, 4. as lecturers and writers, and 5. on the faculties at various levels of education. Many do not enter the enterprise system in business and the professions, and for the most part they quickly discover the fallacies of what they have been taught. But those who eschew the mainstream of the public system often remain in key positions of influence where they mold public opinion and often shape governmental action. In many instances, these intellectuals end up in regulatory agencies or governmental departments with large authority over the business system they do not believe in. If the foregoing analysis is approximately sound, a priority task of business and organizations such as the Chamber is to address the campus origin of this hostility. Few things are more sanctified in American life than academic freedom. It would be fatal to attack this as a principle. But if academic freedom is to retain the qualities of openness, fairness, and balance, which are essential to its intellectual significance, there is a great opportunity for constructive action. The thrust of such action must be to restore the qualities just mentioned to the academic communities. What can be done about the campus? The ultimate responsibility for intellectual integrity on the campus must remain on the administrators and faculties of our colleges and universities, but organizations such as the Chamber can assist and activate constructive change in many ways, including the following. Staff of scholars. The Chamber should consider establishing a staff of highly qualified scholars in the social sciences who do believe in the system. It should include several of national reputation whose authorship would be widely respected even when disagreed with. Staff of speakers. There also should be a staff of speakers of the highest competency. These might include the scholars, and certainly those who speak for the Chamber would have to articulate the product of the scholars. Speakers Bureau. In addition to full-time staff personnel, the Chamber should have a Speakers Bureau, which should include the ablest and most effective advocates from the top echelons of American business. Evaluation of textbooks. The staff of scholars, or preferably a panel of independent scholars, should evaluate social science textbooks, especially in economics, political science, and sociology. This should be a continuing program. The objective of such evaluation should be oriented toward restoring the balance essential to genuine academic freedom. This would include assurance of fair and factual treatment of our system of government and our enterprise system, its accomplishments, its basic relationship to individual rights and freedoms, and comparisons with the systems of socialism, fascism, and communism. Most of the existing textbooks have some sort of comparisons, but many are superficial, biased, and unfair. We've seen the civil rights movement insist on rewriting many of the textbooks in our universities and schools. The labor unions likewise insist that textbooks be fair to the viewpoints of organized labor. Other interested citizens groups have not hesitated to review, analyze, and criticize textbooks and teaching materials. In a democratic society, this can be a constructive process and should be regarded as an aid to genuine academic freedom and not as an intrusion upon it. If the authors, publishers, and users of textbooks know that they will be subjected honestly, fairly, and thoroughly to review and critique by eminent scholars who believe in the American system, a return to more rational balance can be expected. Equal time on the campus. The Chamber should insist upon equal time on the college speaking circuit. The FBI publishes each year a list of speeches made on college campuses by avowed communists. The number in 1970 exceeded 100. There were, of course, many hundreds of appearances by leftists and ultra-liberals who urged the types of viewpoints indicated earlier in this memorandum. There was no corresponding representation of American business, or indeed by individuals or organizations who appeared in support of the American system of government and business. Every campus has its formal and informal groups which invite speakers. Each law school does the same thing. Many universities and colleges officially sponsor lecture and speaking programs. We all know the inadequacy of the representation of business in the programs. It will be said that few invitations would be extended to chamber speakers. On many campuses, freedom of speech has been denied to all who express moderate or conservative viewpoints. This undoubtedly would be true unless the chamber aggressively insisted upon the right to be heard. In effect, insisted upon equal time. University administrators and the great majority of student groups and committees would not welcome being put in the position publicly of refusing a forum to diverse views. Indeed, this is a classic excuse for allowing communists to speak. The two essential ingredients are 1, to have attractive, articulate, and well-informed speakers, and 2, to exert whatever degree of pressure publicly and privately may be necessary to assure opportunities to speak. The objective always must be to inform and enlighten, and not merely to propagandize. Balancing of faculties. Perhaps the most fundamental problem is the imbalance of many faculties. Correcting this is indeed a long-range and difficult project, yet it should be undertaken as part of an overall program. This would mean the urging of the need for faculty balance upon university administrators and boards of trustees. The methods to be employed require careful thought, and the obvious pitfalls must be avoided. Improper pressure would be counterproductive, but the basic concepts of balance, fairness, and truth are difficult to resist if properly presented to boards of trustees, by writing and speaking, and by appeals to alumni associations and groups. This is a long road and not one for the faint-hearted, but if pursued with integrity and conviction, it could lead to a strengthening of both academic freedom on the campus and of the values which have made America the most productive of all societies. Graduate schools of business. The Chamber should enjoy a particular rapport with the increasingly influential graduate schools of business. Much that has been suggested above applies to such schools. Should not the Chamber also request specific courses in such schools dealing with the entire scope of the problem addressed by this memorandum? This is now essential training for the executives of the future. Secondary education. While the first priority should be at the college level, the trends mentioned above are increasingly evidenced in the high schools. Action programs tailored to the high schools and similar to those mentioned should be considered. The implementation thereof could become a major program for local chambers of commerce, although the control and direction, especially the quality control, should be retained by the National Chamber. What can be done about the public? Reaching the campus and the secondary schools is vital for the long term. Reaching the public generally may be more important for the shorter term. The first essential is to establish the staffs of eminent scholars, writers, and speakers who will do the thinking, the analysis, the writing, and the speaking. It will also be essential to have staff personnel who are thoroughly familiar with the media and how most effectively to communicate with the public. Among the more obvious means are the following. Television. The national television network should be monitored in the same way that textbooks should be kept under constant surveillance. This applies not merely to so-called educational programs, such as Selling of the Pentagon, but to the daily news analysis, which so often includes the most insidious type of criticism of the enterprise system. It has been estimated that the evening half-hour news programs of the networks reach daily some 50 million Americans. Whether this criticism results from hostility or economic ignorance, the result is the gradual erosion of confidence in business and free enterprise. This monitoring, to be effective, would require constant examination of the texts of adequate samples of programs. Complaints to the media and to the Federal Communications Commission should be made promptly and strongly when programs are unfair or inaccurate. Equal time should be demanded when appropriate. Effort should be made to see that the forum-type programs, the Today Show, Meet the Press, etc., afford at least as much opportunity for supporters of the American system to participate as these programs do for those who attack it. Other media. Radio and the press are also important, and every available means should be employed to challenge and refute unfair attacks, as well as to present the affirmative case through these media. The scholarly journals. It is especially important for the Chamber's faculty of scholars to publish. One of the keys to success of the liberal and leftist faculty members has been their passion for publication and lecturing. A similar passion must exist among the Chamber's scholars. Incentives might be devised to induce more publishing by independent scholars who do believe in the system. There should be a fairly steady flow of scholarly articles presented to a broad spectrum of magazines and periodicals, ranging from the popular magazines, Life, Look, Reader's Digest, etc., to the more intellectual ones, Atlantic, Harper's, Saturday Review, New York, etc., and to the various professional journals. One illustration of the type of article which should not go unanswered appeared in the popular The New York of July 19, 1971. This was entitled A Populist Manifesto by ultra-liberal Jack Newfield, who argued that the root need in our country is to redistribute wealth. Books, paperbacks, and pamphlets. The newsstands at airports, drugstores, and elsewhere are filled with paperbacks and pamphlets advocating for everything from revolution to erotic-free love. One finds almost no attractive, well-written paperbacks or pamphlets on our side. It will be difficult to compete with an Eldridge Cleaver or even a Charles Reich for reader attention, but unless the effort is made on a large enough scale and with appropriate imagination to assure some success, this opportunity for educating the public will be irretrievably lost. Paid advertisements. Business pays hundreds of millions of dollars to the media for advertisements. Most of this supports specific products. Much of it supports institutional image making, and some fraction of it does support the system. But the latter has been more or less tangential, and rarely part of a sustained major effort to inform and enlighten the American people. If American business devoted only 10% of its annual advertising budget to this overall purpose, it would be a statesman-like expenditure. The neglected political arena. In the final analysis, the payoff, short of revolution, is what government does. Business has been the favorite whipping boy of many politicians for many years, but the measure of how far this has gone is perhaps best found in the anti-business views now being expressed by several leading candidates for President of the United States. It is still Marxist doctrine that the capitalist countries are controlled by big business. This doctrine, consistently a part of leftist propaganda all over the world, has a wide public following among Americans. Yet, as every business executive knows, few elements of American society today have as little influence in government as the American businessman, the corporation, or even the millions of corporate stockholders. If one doubts this, let him undertake the role of lobbyist for the business point of view before congressional committees. The same situation obtains in the legislative halls most of the states and major cities. One does not exaggerate to say that, in terms of political influence with respect to the course of legislation and government action, the American business executive is truly the forgotten man. Current examples of the impotency of business and of the near contempt with which businessmen's views are held are the stampedes by politicians to support almost any legislation related to consumerism or to the environment. Politicians reflect what they believe to be the majority of views of their constituents. It is thus evident that most politicians are making the judgment that the public has little sympathy for the businessman or his viewpoint. The educational programs suggested above would be designed to enlighten public thinking, not so much about the businessman and his individual role, but about the system which he administers and which provides the goods, services, and jobs on which our country depends. But one should not postpone more direct political action while awaiting the gradual change in public opinion to be effected through education and information. Business must learn the lesson, long ago learned by labor and other self-interest groups. This is the lesson that political power is necessary, that such power must be assiduously cultivated, and that when necessary it must be used aggressively and with determination, without embarrassment and without the reluctance which has been so characteristic of American business. As unwelcome as it may be to the chamber, it should consider assuming a broader and more vigorous role in the political arena. Neglected opportunity in the courts. American business and the enterprise system have been affected as much by the courts as by the executive and legislative branches of government. Under our constitutional system, especially with an activist-minded Supreme Court, the judiciary may be the important instrument for social, economic, and political change. Other organizations and groups recognizing this have been far more astute in exploiting judicial action than American business. Perhaps the most active exploiters of the judicial system have been groups ranging in political orientation from liberal to the far left. The American Civil Liberties Union is one example. It initiates or intervenes in scores of cases each year, and it files briefs amicus curiae in the Supreme Court in a number of cases during each term of that court. Labor unions, civil rights groups, and now the public interest law firms are extremely active in the judicial arena. Their success, often at business's expense, has not been inconsequential. This is a vast area of opportunity for the chamber if it is willing to undertake the role of spokesman for the American business and if, in turn, business is willing to provide the funds. As with respect to scholars and speakers, the chamber would need a highly competent staff of lawyers. In special situations, it should be authorized to engage, to appear as counsel amicus in the Supreme Court, lawyers of national standing and reputation. The greatest care should be exercised in selecting the cases in which to participate or the suits to institute, but the opportunity merits the necessary effort. Neglected stockholder power. The average member of the public thinks of business as an impersonal corporate entity owned by the very rich and managed by overpaid executives. There is an almost total failure to appreciate that business actually embraces, in one way or another, most Americans. Those for whom business provides jobs constitute a fairly obvious class, but the 20 million stockholders, most of whom are of modest means, are the real owners, the real entrepreneurs, the real capitalists under our system. They provide the capital which fuels the economic system which has produced the highest standard of living in all history. Yet stockholders have been as ineffectual as business executives in promoting a genuine understanding of our system or in exercising political influence. The question which merits the most thorough examination is how can the weight and influence of stockholders, 20 million voters, be mobilized to support 1. An educational program, and 2. A political action program. Individual corporations are now required to make numerous reports to shareholders. Many corporations also have expensive news magazines which go to employees and stockholders. These opportunities to communicate can be used far more effectively as educational media. The corporation itself must exercise restraint in undertaking political action and must, of course, comply with applicable laws. But is it not feasible, through an affiliate of the Chamber or otherwise, to establish a national organization of American stockholders and given enough muscle to be influential? A more aggressive attitude. Business interests, especially big business and their national trade organizations, have tried to maintain low profiles, especially with respect to political action. As suggested in the Wall Street Journal article, it has been fairly characteristic of the average business executive to be tolerant, at least in public, of those who attack his corporation and the system. Very few businessmen or business organizations respond in kind. There's been a disposition to appease, to regard the opposition as willing to compromise or as likely to fade away in due time. Business has shunted confrontation politics. Business, quite understandably, has been repelled by the multiplicity of non-negotiable demands made constantly by self-interest groups of all kinds. While neither responsible business interests nor the United States Chamber of Commerce would engage in the irresponsible tactics of some pressure groups, it is essential that spokesmen for the enterprise system at all levels and at every opportunity be far more aggressive than in the past. There should be no hesitation to attack the naders, the Marcuses, and the others who openly seek destruction of the system. There should not be the slightest hesitation to press vigorously in all political arenas for support of the enterprise system, nor should there be reluctance to penalize politically those who oppose it. Lessons can be learned from organized labor in this respect. The head of the AFL-CIO may not appeal to businessmen as the most enduring or public-minded of citizens. Yet, over many years, the heads of national labor organizations have done what they were paid to do very effectively. They may not have been beloved, but they have been respected, where it counts the most, by politicians, on the campus, and among the media. It is time for American business, which has demonstrated the greatest capacity in all history to produce and to influence consumer decisions, to apply their great talents vigorously to the preservation of the system itself. The cost. The type of program described above, which includes a broadly based combination of education and political action, if undertaken long-term and adequately staffed, would require far more generous financial support from American corporations than the Chamber has ever received in the past. High-level management participation in Chamber affairs also would be required. The staff of the Chamber would have to be significantly increased with the highest quality established and maintained. Salaries would have to be at levels fully comparable to those paid key business executives and the most prestigious faculty members. Professionals of the great skill in advertising and in working with the media, speakers, lawyers, and other specialists would have to be recruited. It is possible that the organization of the Chamber itself would benefit from restructuring. For example, as suggested by Union experience, the office of President of the Chamber might well be a full-time career position. To assure maximum effectiveness and continuity, the Chief Executive Officer of the Chamber should not be changed each year. The functions now largely performed by the President could be transferred to a Chairman of the Board, annually elected by the membership. The Board, of course, would continue to exercise policy control. Quality control is essential. Essential ingredients of the entire program must be responsibility and quality control. The publications, the articles, the speeches, the media programs, the advertising, the briefs filed in courts, and the appearances before legislative committees all must meet the most exacting standards of accuracy and professional excellence. They must merit respect for their level of public responsibility and scholarship, whether one agrees with the viewpoints expressed or not. Relationship to freedom. The threat to the enterprise system is not merely a matter of economics, it is also a threat to individual freedom. It is this great truth, now so submerged by the rhetoric of the New Left and of many liberals, that must be reaffirmed if this program is to be meaningful. There seems to be little awareness that the only alternatives to free enterprise are varying degrees of bureaucratic regulation of individual freedom, ranging from that under moderate socialism to the iron heel of the leftist or rightist dictatorship. We in America already have moved very far indeed towards some aspects of state socialism, as the needs and complexities of a vast urban society require types of regulation and control that were quite unnecessary in earlier times. In some areas, such regulation and control already have seriously impaired the freedom of both business and labor, and indeed of the public generally. but most of the essential freedoms remain: private ownership, private profit, labor unions, collective bargaining, consumer choice, and a market economy in which the competition largely determines price, quality, and variety of the goods and services provided the consumer. In addition to the ideological attack on the system itself discussed in this memorandum, its essentials are also threatened by inequitable taxation and, more recently, by an inflation which has seemed uncontrollable. The recent freeze of prices and wages may well be justified by the current inflationary crisis, but if imposed as a permanent measure, the enterprise system will have sustained a near-fatal blow. But whatever the causes of diminishing economic freedom may be, the truth is that freedom as a concept is indivisible. As the experience of the socialist and totalitarian states demonstrates, the contraction and denial of economic freedom is followed inevitably by governmental restrictions on other cherished rights. It is this message, above all others, that must be carried home to the American people. Conclusion. It hardly need be said that the views expressed above are tentative and suggestive. The first step should be a thorough study, but this would be an exercise in futility unless the board of directors of the Chamber accepts the fundamental premise of this paper, namely that business and the enterprise system are in deep trouble and the hour is late.